that's where we are in the year 2024. Like, I was promised flying cars, my hands are still wet.
This is the fourth industrial revolution. So it's not the first time we've gone through this society-changing shift.
My other primary takeaway there is you're way more prepared for your podcast.
Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast.
All right, I'm excited. I'm here with Mike today, who we just bumped into each other at the Podcast Movement Expo conference in Washington, D.C., not in Washington, D.C. Recently. Mike, how's it going?
It's fantastic. And I'm so glad we got to meet at that event. It's my first time going to Podcast Movement. And it's funny you mentioned in DC, not DC. DC is one of my favorite cities, but I hadn't been there in years. And I was excited for the opportunity to go up to DC after the event was over. Because like you said, we weren't in DC, but still spent a little time in the city.
Yeah, I'd never been to that, wherever we were, Bethesda Harbor, something. And
National Harbor. We were in National Harbor. Yeah, across from Richmond. Very lovely space, but yeah, not near anything.
No, it's funny when I got there, I like coming from the airport, I'm in the car and I'm looking around, I'm like, this is nice. Like, I'd want to live here. This is like so, and then it took like 30 seconds before I was like, no, this is all artificial, just meant for people here for a conference. And none of this is real. This is all a facade. This entire area is a facade. There are no local humans who live here.
No.
Yeah.
None whatsoever.
Yeah. It's like Vegas and DC. Before we get started, who are you? How did you get here? And 2 minutes on what, if anything, you'd like to sell so that people can fast forward 2 minutes and avoid the pitch.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Allton. I live in St. Louis. I've been creating content for over a decade. I've had side business and full-time gigs simultaneously for that entire period. For the last 7 years, I've worked full-time for Agorapulse, their social media management tool, and it's there that I have 4 active podcasts, which is why I was at Podcast Movement to see how I could level up my podcasting. And then the social media hat's my side hustle, where I talk today about AI and marketing, and I've also got an AI podcast there, the AI and Marketing Unpacked show.
Awesome. That was very condensed. Everybody who fast forwarded 2 minutes is going to miss the next part of this conversation.
That's right. Yeah, you got to go back and you got to figure it out. You got to hear me say my pitch 3 times.
Why don't we just sit here and say nothing for another minute and 20 seconds so everybody can catch up? I feel like it's predictable, but I want to dive right into AI just because I came out of that event specifically feeling really like everybody was bent out of shape around AI and like, is it honest? Is it like is it ethical? Like all these, to me, things that I wouldn't consider in the top 10 list of concerns I would have with AI today necessarily. But people were very like sketched out, for to use a term that kids would use. Everybody just seemed very like, and maybe that I'm latching on. There was also people that like, oh my God, AI is amazing. And it's going to be amazing. And it's going to change everything. Like that part was there, but the nitty gritty stuff seemed to be a lot like very like, what are the legal consequences? What are like, it was, how did you see that?
I saw a lot of that. I also saw a lot of people just put off by, to your point, the fact that AI is in everything these days. This AI-ification of every tool, every business that you look at online. And we saw a lot of the vendors there touting how they use AI or they are now an AI tool. When you really get into it, it's like, are you really using AI? Is this just an automation that 2 years ago you would have said, this is an automation, this is an algorithm, this is a setting? There's a lot of that. So we're in that a bit of a hype cycle with AI across the board, particularly when it comes to marketing and marketing adjacent technology, adjacent kinds of industries like podcasting, where you get a lot of pushback. And the question of the ethics and the legality, while all those are valid questions, I often feel like people are using that as a crutch or a shield or as an excuse to push back on AI because of these other reasons, right? Where they're just like, I'm kind of fed up with it. Or I see all this AI stuff and it makes me personally concerned or worried for my job, my role, my career, my business, my industry. There are businesses and industries that are literally going to be phased out because of AI. And if you're in that, or if you think you might be in it, then you're naturally concerned or frightened. And it's hard to articulate that sometimes. So what that might sound like is, gosh, should we really be using AI for all of this? When what they're trying to say is, I'm really scared. I feel like I'm not going to have a job or a business in 12 months. How do I go about fixing that, right? How do I pivot? How do I adjust? How do I adapt or adopt so that that's no longer a fear of mine? Because it's true. Technology is changing. AI isn't a tool. A lot of people call it a tool, and they might be referring to ChatGPT or a specific tool within AI. But AI as a thing is a technology like electricity. And I often use that comparison because there were guys that we paid to walk up and down the streets of our big cities at dusk every single day to light the gas lamps that were lighting the streets of our cities 200 years ago. And those guys lost their jobs when electricity and the electric light came in, and we replaced all the gas lamps, which were hazardous, with electricity. And they had to go out and find new jobs. And that was just the reality of the situation. Nobody today is saying, you know what, I don't like that electric light thing. We should probably get rid of it and go back to candles and gas lamps. No one's saying that. We all recognize as a society, we've gone on to a better place. But in the moment, it's hard.
Is there something about AI? Is it the versatility or the scope? Because the reality is people's jobs have been eliminated by technology every quarter for the past at least 140 years. Whether you were a gas lamp lighter or a horse and buggy repair mechanic,
right?
Or a typesetter, or it's a constant thing, at least from where I sit. But this seems different.
It is. It's different because, in one respect, it's not new. This is the fourth industrial revolution. So it's not the first time we've gone through this society-changing shift that's permeating every aspect of our society, everything from marketing to business to healthcare and everything in between. But what's different is the rate of change. The first industrial revolution took decades to accomplish. It was excruciatingly slow for people who wanted to progress. This change, this fourth industrial revolution, is happening in a matter of days, weeks, and months. There are things that we can do today that were unheard of just 12 months ago. And where we will be with this technology in the next coming year, 2025, people who are paying attention are mind blown as to the things that we will be able to do and the speed at which these things are changing. We have what are typically referred to as frontier models. So people are familiar with ChatGPT. That's OpenAI's model of AI. Most people will have been familiar with Meta.ai. There's Claude, which is put out by Anthropic. Google has their Gemini platform. So these are what we call frontier models. These are the large language models that these big tech companies are pouring billions of dollars into developing. And they're pouring that money in because they all want to get to the next level and the next level. Not just bigger and stronger and more memory kinds of models, but they want to get to models that can think for themselves. They want to get to what is generally referred to as AGI. That's artificial general intelligence. And they're pushing to get there as rapidly as they can without safeguards, without guardrails. So that's frightening. And it is different because it's just moving at such a fast pace.
So is it, AGI seems ambitious on one hand, but I don't think that one's just around the corner per se. We're now on year from the beginning, year 21 of self-driving cars are easy, with zero success effectively. So we're just going to skip over getting the car to not get stuck when there's a pylon in front of it and move straight to AGI.
Yeah.
Or my always dirt road. And one of the interesting things about this, I'll use your word, revolution, is that it's all virtual. Especially because of the rate of change, none of it's making it into any sort of tangible thing yet. And the example I use is I'll be very impressed by AI when I can walk into a bathroom and put my hands under a hand sensor and it goes, oh, hands. Because today, 30% of the time I try and dry my hands or get a sink to give me, or soap to dispense me thing. It's like, I don't know what that thing is that's attached to your body, but those aren't hands. Sorry. This is where technology is. Like, we made technology, so we don't need bathroom attendants. You're eliminated.
Yeah.
Also, it doesn't know that a hand is a hand. But like, that's where we are in the year 2024. Like, I was promised flying cars. My hands are still wet.
Right.
That's kind of where I feel. And needless to say, I'm a bit of an AI skeptic.
I can
For
hear
those-
those notes coming out.
for the reasons that every time I go in a bathroom, but that's the thing, right? Like, we're talking about rate of change and pace of change, but it's still the same hand dryer that doesn't know my hands are hands. And, there's no AI making it into a car that anybody's going to drive in the foreseeable future, other than maybe Tesla, because they can push software updates. So it to me, it seems very like, on one hand, where ChatGPT, I think the reason that those language models are so interesting is you can see the tangible change in real time, because the whole like, I'm misusing the word model in this case, the whole outcome is like, watch how quickly this thing can come up with words. And also the whole interface is like, you're going to talk to this thing in words. So it's much more of a complete picture than like, AI is going to change the way we engineer large buildings, which you'll see in 2064 the first time you get on an elevator in one. But like, if you're an architect right now, or it's very not tangible for a lot of daily interactions. But for these virtual interactions, that's the whole thing. Like, I think that's why everybody gets so excited about it, is you get to see the future right now. There's no lag time before you see it in the marketplace. Is that why those language models are kind of what everybody perceives to be as the AI stuff right now?
Yeah, and that's also why things are changing so fast, because they can have such a dramatic impact on virtual, digital activities, right? Where, when you talk about the real world physical issues that we're trying to solve for, self-driving cars, hand washing dispensaries that actually work, and a whole host of other things that as a society, they're not perfect, and we're trying to solve for those things. There's that physical element of it that will continue to take time. And just look at these big tech companies over the past 2 years that have been trying to create other kinds of wearable devices, sunglasses, little buttons and pins, and other kinds of things that we can interact with more. And yet it's still the palm handheld phone that we're relying on the most for our interaction with these kinds of systems, because we haven't been able to solve for a better handheld or wearable device. Those things will happen, but what's happening really rapidly today is anything that's digital, whether that's marketing, whether that's doing business online, whether that's research. I mean, you want to talk about advances, you got to look at all the incredible advancements that are happening in genome, gene splicing, and medicine, and all these kinds of things that AI is just allowing researchers to just go leaps and bounds. This is super interesting. One of the stumbling blocks towards self-driving cars and even electric cars in general was the fact that we don't have enough lithium in this country to create all the batteries that we want to put into all of these cars. And we're relying on Australia and South America and Chinese manufacturing to create lithium-ion batteries. But they just discovered a incredibly huge supply of lithium under Arkansas. Like 5 to 19 million tons of lithium is just there under Arkansas, that they actually can drill down there, or whatever their process is, for other kinds of elements and get lithium as a byproduct. This could potentially revolutionize manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries, which will then revolutionize how we are able to create self-driving cars and everything like that. And I mentioned that because it was discovered using machine language. It was basically AI that helped our geological survey professionals here in this country realize, wow, there's a massive supply of lithium right under our doorstep. We don't have to mine it overseas. We don't have to go through China for manufacturing.
So one of my putting my skeptic hat back on, one of my most used a chat GPT prompts is, "Are you sure?" Question mark. Which would be like that would be my first response after. It's like, we found the lithium in Arkansas. Are you sure? Actually, like, and it's always like, it's very polite. It's like, actually, you're doing a good thing by making me question this, because, and then it tells me all the reasons its first answer was wrong.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Matt. You're absolutely right. Let me give you the right answer.
Yeah, it's literally what it's like half the time. It's like, you're absolutely right to question my conclusion. As it relates to that AGI jump, and as it relates to like the language model, so that's like a really huge discovery, right? That AI or the language model was part of finding. The thing that I am trying to do the math on is, like, in between today, like, let's say we're relatively close to the starting block, and this AGI destination at some point out. I have this concern about, and concern's the wrong word. I have this theory that as more and more people rely on AI to generate that sort of content, or even something like, going out and finding, a new lithium deposit, as everybody starts to use it, the new data available for the model dries up. Right? So it's like today, great, we can see the language model off of everything on Wikipedia and Reddit. But fast forward 2 years, 4 years, but before AGI, and it's like everything that's being updated on Wikipedia and Reddit is coming from a language model. How does the human element how does that human innovation continue to thrive in a world where, like, sort of what you mentioned, you're atrophying the experts in the field a little bit, or maybe the non-experts in the field a little bit, but at the same time, all of those human ingenuity things are what is making the language model today super powerful. Like, I see this sort of, two graphs merging together of, like, the amount of content, non-AI generated content it can consume, that starts to go like this, and the amount of AI content starts going like this. And pretty soon, it looks like a few generations of royalty where there's a little bit of inbred information being passed through the models. Like, how do humans fit before we get, like, once we get to AGI, that's a different thing, right? It's like, oh, the computer will think about all the data that it's never had to consume before. But how do humans factor in?
Yeah, I see a lot of what you're talking about paralleling, the early days of the internet, when people could build websites on whatever. And we started to see, link farms and all kinds of spam sites being created all around the world, simply to just be there and to generate traffic and to generate ad revenue without offering any kind of real value, nothing substantive. They were duplicating content from other substantive sites and so on. And I see that as a parallel, because over the course of several years, which if you're looking at the span of humanity, just a blink of an eye, right? But in the course of a few years, as a society, we kind of figured out how to devalue that kind of content, those kinds of websites. We figured that out. It was mostly Google and Bing, but they figured out, we can make sure that our algorithms don't give them any kind of joy. We as humans begin to realize, okay, if I go to a website and all I see are 1,000 website links, that's not going to be valuable to me. I want to see real content. And as a society, we just kind of push that off to the side. And I see that same thing happening over the course of the next few months and years with AI generated content. We will begin to identify that. Algorithms will help us identify it. AI will help us identify AI generated content, and its place will be relegated accordingly. Mm-hmm. Some content, I was just saying this to somebody yesterday, some content, some kind of commodity content, I think is perfectly fine if it's generated by AI, because we're just looking for factual information, the answer to a question. I mean, you mentioned Wikipedia. I don't know how much longer sites like Wikipedia will continue to exist when you've got computers that can tell us everything we need to know about a particular subject.
But they learned it from Wikipedia.
Maybe.
That's my point.
They learned it from Wikipedia. Yeah.
So that's kind of my point, is like, okay, so at AGI, they'll learn on their own.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously that's the destination. But in the meantime, if people are like, oh, well, I can learn everything I need to from a language model, there's no need for Wikipedia to exist. Well, then I don't know where the language model gets its information from, because it's not smart enough to generate it yet. And then all the people who basically led to its knowledge up to start date, right, X, are now like, I don't really have it. Like, to your point, like being a Wikipedia contributor, not quite so important anymore. Look at how good ChatGPT or Claude or whoever can replicate my thing. I'm going to go tend to my flower bed instead. That's a better use of my time. And then you come back 2 years later and you're like, oh, I was the expert on Wikipedia on, the monarch butterfly and the migration patterns in South America. Let me see what's changed. And it's like the monarch butterfly is now actually a rocket ship, and it's 7 light years away. And you're just like, who told you that? And it's like, nobody. All the monarch butterfly experts publishing content on the internet all got replaced by, people doing AI updates. And now it's like that episode of The Simpsons where they play broken telephone, right? And it's like, gets to the last person. It's like purple monkey dishwasher. And it's like, eventually everything turns into purple monkey dishwasher if you keep filling, learn from what you posted yesterday is effectively what what AI is going to have to start doing, if it already hasn't, right? Like, if you look at some of the newer models that will go search the internet, it's like, I found information from an AI generated article for you, and now I'm going to reinterpret it, and then you're going to post this, and then tomorrow somebody else is going to do it. I just feel like the quality of the information has to degenerate, not quickly, like in the next 3 years, 5 years, I don't think you'd notice, but somewhere between now and AGI, I just feel like it's going to be in some sort of self hype cycle.
There's some humor in what you're saying, and there's some truth there. Where I want people listening to realize is that it's not like we're talking about making a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, right? When you're talking about information that today's large language models know, if they use that information to train the next version of itself, if ChatGPT 5 is using information that ChatGPT 4.0 knows, there's no degradation of information or data. So the monarch butterfly is still a monarch butterfly when it gets to ChatGPT 5 or 6 or 7. The real question, I think, is how do we continue to inform models about new developments and new information that they didn't already know previously? Because they're talking about training large language models on AI generated data. They're working on that. That's something that they're actually actively testing, and they're finding actually a lot of success with. But I think what'll be really interesting is if business models like Wikipedia end up not being sustainable, then it's up to OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and Meta to figure out, okay, how do we create new repositories of information to train the models on? And that's actually something they're actively working on. They're working with, sometimes at the end of a lawsuit, with news companies like the New York Times and News Corp and so on. And they're literally working with them and not just paying them off and then forgetting about it, because they need those sources. They need those real-time avenues and channels and mediums for information that they can ingest and understand what's happening in the world. And I suspect they'll have to do something along the lines of a Wikipedia. Maybe it's not public. Maybe it's something where they're paying researchers to go out and ingest the latest medical journals and the latest scientific journals and whatever other information they can, sources they can find that will continue to inform language models going forward. But I think that's probably where we're going to be headed in the next couple of years.
And along those lines, where do you see, is there specific, I would say verticals, but are there specific areas of information that, looking around the corner, you kind of see as like really exploding AI with AI rather, as opposed to, all human knowledge? Like where do you see the explosive growth happening?
Initially, it's happening in very tech-centric industries like marketing, because we're familiar with technology. Most marketers are very comfortable with technology. They have to be today with digital marketing being so prevalent. And because marketers are marketers, we talk about marketing very easily. So there's plenty of documentation out there for AI to ingest, and we're very comfortable, generally speaking, turning to AI to help build strategies and tactics and that sort of thing. But that's just surface level stuff. I think the real developments are going to be in more nuanced areas of science and technology, like medicine, like we talked about a moment ago. I don't think it's a stretch to say that within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have cures for cancer and other pernicious diseases as a direct result of AI. If you look at Nobel and the prizes that are awarded every single year for development, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry and the Nobel Prize for Physics this year were awarded primarily to AI individuals. And there were several individuals with each prize, and they weren't all involved with AI.
Yeah.
But that's because of the impact that artificial intelligence and its application is able to have on non-technical things, chemistry and physics, and very soon medicine.
Yeah. Can you unpack kind of where I think we started, which was a lot of how much like the hype cycle, where we're at in the hype cycle, because that to me sounds very hype cycle-y. But it just in the sense that like that's only interesting because it's the beginning, right? Like I assume the other people being awarded the Nobel Prize in chemistry and other areas also like used computers. And today we're not like highlighting the fact that they used microchips as part of their research because it's kind of table stakes that, of course, some of your research is going to use a computer. Whereas 1972, maybe there were two guys not on a podcast, but maybe on a radio station going, the people who got the Nobel Prize this year were using microchips. So like how much of that is, or how long will that be noteworthy? Maybe specifically in those areas, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's noteworthy today. Is it like in 3 years? Like, well, of course the Nobel Prize winner was using AI. What are you, stupid?
Right.
Right. Yeah. How close are we to that?
I love this question because if it hasn't come across, I'm actually an historian. That's what I studied in school. So I have that historian lens. Typically, I've been applying it to social media and marketing. My blog is filled with articles about what just happened, where we're at, and why. And now I'm applying it to AI. And I love this question because you're right. In a number of years, it will no longer be a part of every conversation. Just like we don't talk about electricity, or to your point, we don't talk about the microchip in every conversation. Yes, you and I would not be able to have this conversation today if it weren't for the microchip. But other than this analogy, that would not have come up in the conversation. So I think within the next 5 to 10 years, AI will no longer be a part of the conversation. It will just exist, probably sooner than that, probably within the next 3 to 5 years. And this is where I'm kind of hedging because I don't want to be hype. I don't want to be that guy that's just like, it's going to be amazing. Even though I do believe it is, I recognize that there's, a limit to what it can do and a limit to the perception of how we see these things evolving in the very short term. But yeah, I think by like 2028, the next few years, it will just be a part of everyday life. And the reason I think that is because it is slowly becoming a part of everyday life. By this time next year, we will all have phones that are using AI every minute of every day to help us with the things that we're doing on a normal, non-professional, non-business way. When my wife and I are talking about driving to Southern California over the holidays, my phone will pick up on that and it will start to help me plan out that trip without me having to ask it, without me having to go to Google or Expedia or some other website to think about it. It will automatically know, okay, Mike, well, you know what? If you're leaving on December 23rd, it's pretty likely that the weather's not going to be too great in Utah. So you might want to go through Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico. It's going to help me with that instead of me having to think about it. Right. And so within a very short amount of time, we're all going to be relying on those kinds of things and we'll just get used to it. And to your point, we won't be having that conversation of, wow, is this Apple intelligence and what can it do for me? Right. We won't even think about it.
Yeah. And from that historian perspective, is this the beginning of a real vertical line in time? Like I know you're thinking of it against the other industrial revolutions, but aside from which are mostly, in my mind anyway, measured by impacts in productivity.
Yeah.
And then like second order consequence of the impact on productivity is like increasing quality of life. Is this a vertical line for productivity? Is it a vertical line for both of those things, the way previous revolutions have been? Like, aside from like, it makes it, you can save 10 minutes driving from California, driving to California. The second and third order consequences, are they going to be that extreme that they show up, same thing, two people talking on a podcast 100 years from now as like, oh, that was the decade everything changed?
I like to think that, yes, this will be one of those lines in the history books where things change so significantly and so pervasively throughout society, not just in business productivity, like you said, but in our quality of life, in our length of life. And I say that because I'm paying attention to what the men and women who are most involved in the development of AI are seeing and what they're saying. And so we look at, folks like Sam Altman and what he actually writes and says, and we look at the founder of Anthropic, which is again one of the competing frontier models, and what he's recently said. He wrote a 15-page paper recently about where he sees AI going in the near future, not decades away, but months and years away. And he's seeing, as a result of what he knows AI can do today, and what he's seeing the tests come back before what's released to the company and the public, he's seeing advancements like extreme length of life, like being able to potentially double our average lifespan in the very near future. And that sounds science fiction-y, right? It sounds truly hype.
Yeah.
But when you look at what AI can do, and you look at how much more productive it makes people, what it allows me to then change my focus on, and then you apply those observations to really important areas like medicine, healthcare, like we've been talking about, and the development of the infrastructure of our countries, right? I mean, let's work with AI to develop the next generation of power sources. Like right now, AI is consuming so much power. We're talking about reopening nuclear power plants and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But what if we spend the next 5 years working with AI to develop the next generation of power consumption? What if we work with AI to develop, space exploration and all these incredible advancements of humankind that, again, when you look at the last 100 years and all the things that we've been able to do, they started out as advancements in science and technology, but as a result, they impacted every other aspect of our life. So I do see this as a line in the sand, so to speak.
Something I was thinking about as you were talking is relates to the microchip. There was I think it's an Eric Weinstein theory, but there was this change in where people who were good at science started applying themselves when the microchip became a way to make billions, trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars. And there was a brain drain effect or there just stopped being breakthroughs in physics. And so I think the question would look something like this. Look around the room that you're in. Ignore everything with a microchip. And now tell me you're not in 1975. Like, how would you know you're not in 1975 if you just remove everything with a microchip? Construction materials, basically the same. Construction procedures, processes, basically the same. Fabrics, materials, basically the same. Like, there hasn't been a lot of, his theory was, I think it was a Weinstein theory, that just all of those, because all of those breakthroughs used to come first in physics, and then they would show up in your hardware store or, in business and consumers, 10, 20 years later as a fully baked product. And the premise was that now all those people that used to make those breakthroughs are now writing software and are working on language models. And so anything with a microchip is like, oh my God, the future is now. Everything not with a microchip looks basically the same as it looked 40 years ago. Is that I mean, number one, can you see that? Do you agree with that as a premise in terms of how society has advanced? And then number two, there has to be therefore an upcoming brain drain that, on one hand, we're talking about AI increasing productivity in all these areas. On the other hand, there has to be a brain drain coming of people who were going to study cancer research and maybe cure cancer as a human that are now going to become people who are working on AI. Like, what percentage of people that either haven't been born yet or are just coming through, early schooling are going to end up working in AI on that's where I want to dedicate my life side, not it's just a tool I want to use to do this other cool thing that I actually really like.
I think the flaw with Eric's theory is if I look around my room, what do I see that society has said, that's not good enough, we need to do better? And I don't see a lot of people demanding that we have better windows.
Yep.
Or better doors, right? There's not that intrinsic need to improve those areas of our lives. However, all you need to do is actually look internally. If you think about the standard of medical care 50 years ago, I think it'd be hard to argue that we haven't improved over the past 5 decades.
Sure.
And I think it'd be hard to argue that we aren't going to continue to improve over the next 5 decades because we still talk about every single day how impactful and how dangerous cancer is and how impactful and how awful Alzheimer's is. And so there will be people who will use every tool at their disposal, I think, to combat those kinds of needs. And then we can turn our attention to things like world hunger and automotive safety. Yeah, I mean, people like you and I who, grew up with, certain TV shows and that kind of thing, we've always wanted flying cars. But I don't think the average person is demanding a flying car because they don't see the benefit of a flying car per se. But they do see the need for greater car safety.
Sure.
And they do see the need for gun safety and all these other kinds of issues that are so prevalent in our society. And I think those are the things in the areas where we'll see dramatic improvement over the next 2 decades.
Yeah. So let's zoom back into today.
Yeah.
Because I can go on the futurist stuff forever. But so today you said like one of the major areas where AI can contribute right away is marketing. And lucky for us, that is at least your day job ballywick, or some of your day job ballywick. So talk about marketing today, and number one, how podcasting fits into that, since we're coming off the heels of the show, and how you've seen that change over the last little bit and what you see in the future. And then number two, how do our new AI overlords fit into today's marketing landscape? Like how does that make today's marketers more productive than ever?
Well, it's a great segue because a moment ago you were asking me about how do we keep humanity and all these different things, right? How do we keep our humanity when there's just so much prevalence of computers and technology empowering us, doing things for us, that sort of thing. And this, what we're doing right now, is a great example of how you keep the humanity involved, because great marketing starts and ends with relationship building, whether it's, one-on-one or one-to-many. And that's really challenging, if not impossible to do when a human's not involved.
Right.
So podcasting is a great example of a medium of marketing where you're focusing on the human relationship and you're building that relationship, whether it's you and me building the relationship together, and to heck with anybody who happens to be listening to this show, or you're using the podcast as a medium to come across as authentic and authoritative and hopefully build a relationship with the listener, which is terrific because you're in their ear, for 20, 40, 60 minutes a week. And so there are wonderful ways then that we can bring AI alongside of us to help us and make sure that as a marketer, as much of my time as possible is focused on the relationship building and all the other stuff that has to be done in order to carve out that hour or 2 hour or 4 hours a day for relationship building. I'm either speeding up that time or I'm totally farming it out to AI. So as an example, I think I mentioned I have 4 active podcasts at Agorapulse. Last quarter, I actually had 5, and we put one on pause. But I've got 4 active podcasts, which means every day I'm interviewing people. And I used to spend 2 hours preparing for every single interview. I would research the guest. I had them fill out a form so I know all about them and what they want to talk about. And I'd think about what they want to talk about and their expertise and what I've talked about in the past and my target audience. And I'd come up with a framework for the show. And I'd come up with questions for the guest, all of which I'd share with them in advance. Because I'm mostly talking to prospects of Agorapulse or existing customers of Agorapulse. And typically these are not people who are doing podcast interviews. I am often the very first time anyone has ever interviewed them. They'll tell me that.
Yeah.
Which means they're often nervous, right? And so I like to give them as much as I can up front. So that's not to get into a debate about, whether you should or should not give questions in advance. But once I discovered how to use artificial intelligence and how to build a custom GPT where it's basically a set of instructions that I've developed alongside of AI so that it knows, oh, all right, today we're building a podcast framework. That's the project we're working on today. And it knows to ask me certain questions like, who are you interviewing today? Oh, I'm interviewing Matt. Okay, cool. What's Matt's LinkedIn? I give it Matt's LinkedIn. Okay, great. Do you know what Matt would like to talk about? Indeed, I do. He told me on my form. Here it is. Okay, cool. Well, based on the LinkedIn, I did some Bing research on Matt, by the way. He's awesome. And on what Matt wants to talk about, here's 5 topics for your next show, for your interview with Matt. And I just pick one. And then it says, cool, here's 10 title ideas for that episode. And I pick one. Or I go back and forth. I could say, you know what, I don't like those. Let's go in a different direction, whatever. And then I pick one. And then it says, fantastic. Here's, 10 questions you can ask Matt. Here's 3 takeaways you can expect from the episode. And here's a custom introduction and a bio that I have told the AI, this is how I want to introduce the episode. This is how I want to introduce the guest because I want to hype them up as much as I possibly can. Because again, I know 9 times out of 10, I'm the first time anybody's ever interviewed this individual.
Yeah.
And I want it to be an amazing experience for them, right? And I know as an experienced interviewer, mostly like live and speaking and that sort of thing, that there's a lot that I can do in the introduction of the guest to make them feel fantastic.
Yeah.
A lot of it's the words that I choose to use. Some of it's the energy and the pacing and that sort of thing. I'd like to say, and I've taught it all of that. So it helps me build that out. And so now instead of a 2-hour process, it's 20 minutes. And I went from being able to do 1 podcast for the company to 4 podcasts where we're targeting different verticals, right? We've got a podcast for B2B, one for agencies, one for retail, and one for hospitality. And I'm talking to social media managers and agency owners, and I'm giving them the platform to share their story, which is terrific because then we can use that recording for all kinds of content marketing that we can get into.
Yeah.
But it's AI that's allowed me to scale that in a way that just as individual contributor, I would not have been able to do otherwise.
Right. Or you would have been paying. So I'm hunting for the job that got lost as a result of AI there. And in that case, it would be, there isn't one. And potentially the impact is N number of more customers for Agorapulse and therefore net job growth as a result of AI, which is kind of where we're looking. The flip side would be that had you said, I am going to have 5 shows, damn it, come hell or high water, and I need budget because I need a part-time or a consultant basis production partner who's going to go research all my guests and give me a show format and that's probably the person who goes, oh, actually, never mind. Right. That's the one that went away. But it's interesting. It was an enabler though, right? Like that was the story. It was never, I'm going to go consider getting a person. So like the economics of that job probably wouldn't have worked prior versus now it's like, oh, well, now let's get our productivity up because we have AI at our disposal.
That's exactly right. I launched 1 podcast in Q1, then I launched 2 more in Q2. And because of the process, I was able to have frank conversations back and forth with my CEO. That's who I report to. And so come Q3, he's like, well, let's add 2 more podcasts. And for me, that was no problem.
I mean, my other primary takeaway there is you're way more prepared for your podcast than I am for mine. So that's a good thing. Like, these are my show notes. There have to be other challenges aside from prep to recording, releasing, editing 5 shows. What does that workload look like? Like for people who I feel like podcasts are, it's like dogs. It's like if you have one dog, there's X amount of work. If you have 2 dogs, it's like might as well have 16 dogs.
Yep.
Like two dogs is 16 times the work of one dog. And 4 dogs is still 16 times the work of one dog. How does it work in podcasts? Like is it logarithmic growth at some point? Like how much work and headache is involved in multiple shows?
So it's interesting because I can't stand the sound of my voice, which is not unusual, but there are also tics and things about the way that I speak that 3 years ago when I had my own podcast and I was editing my own podcast using, I think Audacity maybe for a while. I think I used Adobe Audition for a while. I was painstakingly selecting the individual wave file at the millisecond level and removing it and then still hearing that thing and then going back there and doing that again and spend just hours editing my own podcasts. And this is for me personally, which meant I never really got past episode 10 because I just couldn't. It was just too much work, too much masochism involved there for me to continue that line of work.
Yeah.
But here at Agorapulse now, we do have a paid external consultant that does all the editing. So I do the recording, and then literally from that moment on, I am hands off. We have an Asana project. I send the files to the editor. My VA makes sure that those files get uploaded to our Google Drive, that our content editor has the transcript so that she can turn it into a blog post. Our graphics designers, they get an Asana task that asks them to create the graphics with the guest headshot. So I'm done, basically, with the Agorapulse shows. But because of AI, I decided in May of this year, I can do my own podcast and I won't have the same pains that I had before because I used a script.
Yep.
So now I load the 30 to 45 minute interview that I've done with somebody else who's an expert on AI. And by the way, that's why I know everything that I know about AI. So I'm talking to people on the show. And so I load the editor up with that recording and it removes the filler words. I apply studio sound, and then I listen to the show and I'm paying attention to the transcript. I'm fixing major issues. I'm noting anybody that we talked about or any previous shows so I can reference them in the show notes. And I pull out some clips and that's it. So now my editing process today takes just a little bit longer than the length of the episode itself because I'm listening to the whole thing. And it's paying less. Right. And now at the end of it, I've created a great piece of content that I can push to all the podcast platforms and YouTube and my blog and everything. So it's enabled me to have my own show, which I actually go back and forth. It's supposed to be a weekly show, but I get so far ahead in terms of recording so that people book. I reach out to people that I want to have on the show, right? And they can book whatever date they want because it's pre-recorded. And I keep getting so far ahead that I have such a backlog of episodes that are already recorded that I'm going to be like 3 months from now, that one's going to drop. Like I'm interviewing someone this afternoon and it's October 22nd. And right now there's episodes not scheduled to come out until January 12th. And I don't want to wait that long. So I end up pushing out 2 a week because I can, thanks to AI and the ease at which I can edit an episode. It's not that much out of my time to do a second episode this week. And so I'm doing that all of October. I'll probably do it again in November just to keep putting out the content and keep up with the backlog of interviews that I have.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that is quite a backlog if you have that much lead time, but to your point, you wouldn't have that option if you were editing for just as long as you were recording.
No.
Yeah.
I did a podcast that was just about marketing in general, whatever I felt like talking about, not unlike this one. Those were all solo episodes. So they were all relatively short, 10 or 20 minutes apiece. And after I think 9 episodes. I was so sick of myself, I stopped. And then about a year and a half ago, I did a brief series about virtual events because coming out of the pandemic, I was helping a lot of businesses go virtual with their live events and that sort of thing. I did that podcast for a while, and again, after a while, I just couldn't stand it anymore. It was just taking so much time, and it was so painful. Today, I'm recording episode 50 of the AI Marketing Unpacked podcast, and not slowing down at all, because it's so painless.
Yeah. And how does podcasting fit into like the larger marketing strategy? Like in a world of social and all this stuff that digital marketing means today, from where you sit, where does podcasting fit for, someone like Agorapulse as a good place to start?
Yeah, I think this should be at the forefront, and it's not, but I think it should be. I think that every business, whether you're a small business, mid-market, or enterprise, should be looking at a video-first strategy when it comes to marketing. And there's no easier way to create video than to simply interview really interesting people, whether your guests are prospects, customers, partners in the industry. That was the podcast that I started in Q1, the Martech show, where we were bringing in different partners every week, like other SaaS companies in marketing, and interviewing them. We put that on pause in Q3. But the other ones, I'm generally speaking, talking to prospects or customers about their stories. What business wouldn't benefit from having great stories about how the people in their business, their target audience, are succeeding in their industry with or without their product? And so I start with, it's a video podcast, and that's what everybody I think should do. Start with that video first. And you are shortchanging yourself if you don't publish it as video. We saw at Podcast Movement, Tom Webster stood on stage and said 52% of podcasts are found on YouTube.
Yeah.
And that's double second and third place, right? No one's else is even close. It's not like Spotify is at 49. No.
Yeah.
Spotify's lucky to have like 10% of the market, right? Most people are finding their content on YouTube today. Yeah. So absolutely, they should be creating video content, and a video interview format is probably, I think, the easiest format. You can create 20-minute videos, 40-minute videos, relatively easy. There's a dearth of people that you can bring on the show. And if you're short of guests, interview yourself, interview somebody else in the company. But then when you do that, not only are you creating the video podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and everybody else, you have let's say it's a 30-minute show, right? Well, that's 7,500 words of text in a transcript. That is a pillar piece of content for your blog. And you can pull out snippets. And now, thanks to my video podcast, I'm now active on TikTok and Instagram Reels, where I wasn't a year ago. But you go to my TikTok channel now, I get 200 to 500 people looking at my videos, each one on TikTok. That wasn't happening a year ago. I was sporadic at best on TikTok. YouTube Shorts is the same way. And in fact, YouTube as a platform, I was not posting videos regularly to YouTube. Launched the podcast, went full on video into YouTube in August, a few months later. And now I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of views on YouTube. And that's translating into awareness of me and the show, and awareness of the brand. And it's driving traffic back to the brand and so on. So that's where I would start today.
And for people who are starting, or even people who are doing it today, everybody in their mind wants to be Rogan or, whoever. And, the X% of people are going to go, oh my God, he's only getting 200 views. Ugh.
Yeah, right.
I don't even get out of bed if I don't get 500 views on some piece of content. But for specifically B2B, but for a business, the impact of even one of those 500 people, or 0.4 of them on average, being a real qualified buyer who's getting to know you and your brand and all that. Can you talk about what that means from a marketing and sales standpoint?
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out, because you're right. Nobody should go into podcasting or even content creation in general as a part of the marketing arm of your business with the hope of becoming a Joe Rogan or something like that, right? There's certainly, you can create content for entertaining purposes. And if you're going to be a content creator, then have those aspirations. Want to be Mr. Beast in your space. But if you're a business, no, forget about it. That's not what you're doing. You're not trying to create entertaining content, or at least you should not be. Instead, you should be thinking about talking to your target audience as closely and authentically as you can, and leading them into learning more about your business and learn about you personally, and becoming potentially a prospect and a customer down the road. And when you have that mindset, now think about whether or not it would be beneficial to you if I put you in a room full of 200 prospects and you got to talk to them for 30 minutes about what you do and how you do it, and show them how you help somebody that looks just like them achieve success in their industry, which is their industry, right? And you were along and you were that helpful guide in their journey to success. Now that suddenly feels a lot different, to your point, right? Because if just a couple of those people raise their hands and say, yeah, gosh, Mike, I'd like to learn more. Maybe, can I get a demo of that? Or, can we get on a discovery call? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Which is why we do the way that we do the podcast from the beginning, which is to talk to our prospects.
Right.
I don't mean to pull aside the curtain too much here, but we actually have lists of the people that we want to sell to in target industries. These are the same people that our sales team is actively calling and emailing and connecting with on social media, right? Those are the same people I'm asking to come on the podcast.
Right.
So oftentimes I'm the first time they've ever heard of the brand.
Yeah.
I'm the first ever contact that they have with the brand. And that contact is designed to make them look and feel amazing.
Right.
And I do, right? I bring them on the show, I hype them up. We have a great conversation. We talk about how amazing they are, how they've overcome some, incredible challenges. And it's funny, I bake my mid-roll videos in to the show. So all the podcasters in the audience, you've got a mid-roll video, and usually you insert that in post, in editing. I bake them in because I use StreamYard. So it's super easy for me. I've got the guest. If Matt, you're my guest, I will say, yeah, we're talking with Matt, and I've got a bunch more questions from Matt. But before we get to those, let me share with you what Jay Baer thinks about the B2B marketing industry and some of the tools that he's using. And boom. Now I'm playing a 40-second clip of Jay Baer talking about B2B marketing and how he loves Agorapulse. And you, the guest, you're watching the whole thing because you're stuck there. You're sitting in my studio. You can't leave. And so they get that exposure to Agorapulse, whether I end up talking about Agorapulse during the show or not, because I may not, right? It just depends on the topic and whether it relates to social media management. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we're talking about influencer marketing. I had a great interview with Megan Bowen from Refine Labs talking about what it was like to take over the role of CEO of a marketing agency from Chris Walker, who was just a huge, visibly, a very visible guy in that space, just a big presence, and what that was like. It was a super interesting story. Social media management had nothing to do with that conversation. Very telling. But she still got to hear about and learn about Agorapulse as a result of the conversation. So that's one of the things that businesses can think about is who are we talking to and why are we talking to them, and view the number of people that we're reaching as a very, very small but highly targeted group that, we don't need to reach thousands and tens of thousands of people. If we do, great. I mean, no one's going to turn aside tons of downloads, but what we're trying to do is connect again on that individual basis, right? Create those relationships, whether it's the person in the chair that you're talking to or the people that are listening to you on a weekly basis.
Do you think today's marketers, whatever that loaded phrase means, especially the younger folk, that were raised on TikTok, do people have the attention span on the buy side's the wrong word, but on the marketing side, in a world where everything is like, how fast can I measure a click? How short can I make my video? Do people have the patience for a podcast type lead that might take 2 years to develop, in a world where it's like, well, I bought an AdWord and I ran it for an hour and now I know that doesn't work?
Yeah, it's one of the challenges today, because not that they have short attention spans. It's that there's just so much competition for attention. People today are very happy to sit and binge watch a show on Netflix for hours. And they're just as happy to binge listen to a podcast for hours if it's helpful to them, if it's relevant to them. The problem is getting that podcast, getting that show in front of them, capturing their attention long enough so that they know it is of interest. And that's again where the repurposing that we mentioned earlier can be so powerful, right? I go into the script, I listen to my podcast, I'll find 2 or 3 60-second or less segments that I think are the most powerful. And that's what gets shared to all of my social channels. I mean, all of them. Even LinkedIn is getting into the vertical video game.
Yep.
So if you're not creating vertical video content today, you're missing out. Get that vertical video, 60 seconds or less, maybe 90 seconds. I think YouTube Shorts is transitioning to 90 seconds or less, so that you can go 90 seconds on all the platforms. But now you can share that to TikTok, to Pinterest, to LinkedIn, to X, Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels, and so on. And you can capture just enough attention to let your target audience know this is content that's relevant to them, that it's interesting to them, and then give them an easy way to go in to listen to the full video or the full podcast or read the rest of the article. And that's again where advertising can play. Gone are the days when you can just simply advertise your features and benefits and expect to drive any kind of real interest. That's just not going to happen today, because the features and benefits of most of the tools today are commoditized.
Sure.
Right? I mean, how many CMS platforms do we actually have out there today that are affordable? Right? How many social media management tools are there today? There's tons, and you could say that about virtually any tool.
Yeah.
Even artificial intelligence. You have your choice today. It's not just ChatGPT.
Yeah.
There's 5 language models you could go to. And for most of what people are going to do, they're probably all going to get the same. I mean, you can go to X and use Grok if you really want to.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would, but you could. So it's all commoditized. So instead, what you got to do is show them that you know who they are and what they care about through the impactful content, and allow that to be kind of the front door into, come on in. There's so much more back here that you could learn about and relate to that might make you interested in our solution.
Yeah. And it's a phrase that I've latched onto is being different is better than being better.
Yeah.
In that commodity world, like, people lead with like, well, why are you better than what I have today? And I'm like, I might not be. I don't know. But I can tell you how we're different. And if you think that's better, then there's an opportunity for us to work together. But I'm not here to say that all of our features are better or this feature is better. But I can tell you how we went about doing it and why that might be different than the approach that you're using today. And I feel like that's also what people can connect with over podcasts and other mediums, is like the je ne sais quoi of your brand. Like people all the time, like in our space, we have a 500-pound gorilla, and tell people all the time, I said, if you're happy there, I can guarantee you won't be happy with us. Like if that is your tribe, then we are definitely not your tribe. And so like my intention every time I'm out representing the brand is to make it clear who we are as a tribe. And magnets have 2 polarities. And so it's like, if that you don't like that, that's great. Now we both know that there is no fit there and we can all move on with our lives. And if there is an attraction there, well, then that's also great, because now we know that we're sort of the same tribe and potentially there's an opportunity for us to work together. But I feel like that's what you can communicate, in that 1-to-1 times 200 people times 30 minutes is not that you built a better mousetrap. It's like, this is how I think about mice. And
right.
Yeah, like that's the opportunity, I think. But at the same time, I see that digital marketing world of like, we test, we measure, and we know, like within minutes, hour. What do you mean the test took hours? Why was it so slow? Days? What even is a day? Weeks? What? Years? No. But the reality is all those account-based marketing activities, some of them do take years to get to, especially like, depending on people's industries. Like if you think of an industry with an average contract length of 18 months, if you don't get immensely lucky the first time you touch somebody, well, it's going to take definitely months, maybe years on average to have an opportunity to work with somebody like that. So what are you doing in the meantime to remind them that you are their tribe and you do want to have that positive polarity ideally?
Yeah, I had this fantastic conversation with Tamsin Webster on the B2B edition of the podcast. And she's the author of Find Your Red Thread. And she's just released a brand new book. So we were talking about it to help her launch the new book. And we were talking about brand story, because my role at Agorapulse is chief storyteller, and that's a relatively new role. We never had anybody like that before. And as part of the onboarding of this new role in Q3, one of my jobs was to figure out, well, what is our brand story? We used to have an about page, it's not even on the website anymore, that talked about how we came into being as a brand. But to your point, it didn't talk about why we were different, right? Yes, we were founded by a couple of French guys. So I guess that makes us different from Hootsuite that was founded by a Canadian. Not really. Who cares, right? Why are we different as a company? And what Tamsin talks about so smartly is talk about, what you do and how you do it, but then talk about why you do it that way. Right. Why is your how so different from everybody else's? Yeah, we're a social media publishing tool. Big deal. So is Hootsuite and Sprout and all of our other competitors, right? But we are more passionate than anybody I know about helping social media managers show that they were successful. Not just do the thing and be successful, but show that they were successful to their boss or to their client, if they're an agency, right? Being able to justify their expense, being able to prove their ROI. Those are the things that we latch on to and really light us up. And that's reflected in our tool, some of the features and benefits and that sort of thing, but it's also reflected in just who we are and how we speak. So we had this great conversation about that. And then as part of my role, I thought, okay, well, I need to come up with a brand story. So I turned to Claude, to AI, and I said, this is what I need to do. Ask me whatever you want to know to help us get to that end result of having a brand story. So that started this fantastic conversation back and forth with AI. It's asking me obvious questions like, who am I? Who's the company? Who are we talking to? And that sort of thing. But then we got into this debate of brand story frameworks, because there's a bunch out there. If you've never really done brand story work, there's a lot of ways that you could approach it. I knew Tamsin's approach. I knew Don Miller's story brand approach. And so I had the AI help me understand the differences between them and decide together which framework are we going to apply, which, spoiler alert, it was Tamsin's with just a little bit of Don's thrown in at the end. And then we crafted together an actual brand story for Agorapulse that really highlights what I just said about how passionate we are about helping social media managers prove their worth and their value. And we came up with something that I think is amazing. And now we can implement that and integrate that into everything else that we're doing, from our homepage to our marketing campaigns, to even our customer success, folks and how they engage with and talk to our existing customers. Because people, whether they've been with us a month or a year, we want them to know how important their success is to us, because that's our differentiator.
Right. Is it fair to say that it's easier to communicate that brand story across that video channel? Like, is that what led you to the whole, if you're not leading with video, you're doing it wrong? Is it being able to communicate that? Yeah,
because we can say in text on a website, we care about our customers. And somebody will read it and it'll come across as flat because it's in text. The reality is, if I'm looking at you on video and you can hear me and I can say, Matt, we care about our customers, the impact is different.
Sure.
You can see my body language, you can hear my tone of voice, and that's just the truth of video. I mean, obviously, in person is the ultimate form of communication, but we can't just take our customers out to dinner all year long. As much as I'd love to host dinners, we talked about that before.
Yeah,
that's not practical or scalable.
Yeah, COVID killed my only strategy for meeting people.
Right. So video's the next best thing. Video, I'm able to show you my hands so you can see I'm trustworthy.
Mhm.
You can see my facial expressions. You can hear my tone of voice, my pacing, and so on. And that hopefully comes across as far more authentic than simple text on the page. That's why 9 times out of 10, if you want to make a really high converting landing page, what are you going to do? You're going to slap a video
Yeah.
right onto it because you need to.
We covered AI. We covered what it takes to run 5 podcasts. I can't let you go without asking a better marketing question than one that's sort of laden in either podcast or AI. Shall we say innuendo? So without leading you to those areas, as somebody who sleeps, breathes, thinks, focuses on marketing all the time, what does marketing, specifically digital marketing, look like in 2029 contrasted against 2024, and like after the whatever vertical lines you think happen between now and then?
One of the things that we're going to see more and more of is partnerships, like strategic partnerships between brands. We're seeing, those of us who are watching that space, already a bit of an explosion with partnerships, because it's being increasingly easier for brands like yours and mine to actually work together on a webinar. I mean, that kind of stuff's been happening for a while. But what's happening today is now there are tools where we can look at our prospects and our customers and see where there's overlap, see how much overlap there is. I mean, first of all, is it a good idea for us to partner? Are we really talking to the same people? Or does it just kind of feel like we're talking to the same people? Because if we aren't really, then we probably shouldn't partner. It's really easy for 2 businesses to just compare websites and feel like, oh, we're talking to this audience. But then when you get into it, you realize that we're segmented this way. We're talking to larger businesses or smaller businesses, and we're really capped. We're very specific or whatever. So the tools today, I'm talking about like Reveal and Crossbeam, where they'll allow you to see where those overlaps are and measure those overlaps. And then once you know that and you agree, okay, yeah, we really are talking to a lot of the same people. We should do something together. Now you can create some really interesting partnership motions where your salespeople are making introductions to your partner salespeople and vice versa. And that's something that's not happening a lot today because they're not used to that motion. But the businesses that are really seeing dramatic growth, those kinds of underlying strategic partnerships are powering it. They're seeing like 10x growth because their sales staff with completely different companies are now working together. And it's not on a commission basis or anything like that. That's part of the challenge. They're not being paid to do that. It's all about reciprocity. But if I send you somebody that is primed and ready to buy, because I've been talking to them, you're going to appreciate that, and you're going to send me folks back. And once you start to scale that, you can see really incredible growth. And that's one of the things that I see a lot happening now in digital marketing, where I think in the next couple of years, that's going to become more mainstream. It's not mainstream today because there's just too much unfamiliarity with that kind of what they're calling a near-bound motion. It's not outbound, it's not inbound, it's near-bound. Right? Who do we know? Who do our prospects and customers know? Who do our partners know that we can bring in? Because one of the things we've been talking about, that underlying truth, this whole conversation, has been how important relationships are. And that just goes back to like word of mouth, really, really traditional marketing. And if I can introduce you to somebody that I'm already working with as a vendor, they're going to trust my opinion. And they're going to be very open to working with you more than they would if they just see that Facebook ad, or even if they listen to me on a podcast. It's so much more powerful. So that's one of the things that I see definitely taking off in the next few years.
Awesome. Well, Mike Allton, thank you so much. This was enlightening. I think I still am going to have to wash my own hands and dry my own hands at some point for the foreseeable future. Thank you so much for your time. This was great. I hope to see you sooner than later somewhere. And if not, I'll be watching and listening.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
This is different. Another round. So much more to talk about. Gonna aim to satisfy with help from CacheFly. Get to it fast. Right here on the Anycast. Make it strong, make it last. Right here on the Anycast. The Anycast podcast, brought to you by CacheFly.